We'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this session of the Northwest Arkansas Tech Summit. Our topic today is disturbing. Disturbing to the point that most people choose one of two ways to address it. You likely do the same. Either you invest time and effort to address the issue, or you ignore it altogether. I'm Mark Hodges, and today I'll be your moderator as we explore the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity, a topic that creates a binary response from most people. These days we hear words put together in sentences that we never would have heard just a few years ago. Words like threat actor, business email compromise, print nightmare, or even ransomware are terms that used to not cross anyone's mind but are increasingly common in our daily work. Cybersecurity challenges come in all forms. Most recently, ransomware attacks have grabbed the headlines. These attacks seem to be growing at an exponential rate, and the targets of the attacks have changed dramatically. You may have heard of the recent attack at Colonial Pipeline, a company that operates 5,500 miles of pipeline for oil and gas. It was hit with a ransomware attack. Workers showed up to work, turned on their computers, and were met with a system hostage message. The pipeline systems themselves had not been corrupted, but they had to shut down the pipeline because the systems they used for billing were held ransom, so they had no way to charge customers. Another recent example is JBS, one of the world's biggest beef suppliers. Ransomware criminals hit the company during the middle of a summer beef shortage, which caused the price of beef to go up just before July 4th. Both examples create cost increases, shortages, and panic buying. Today, ransomware artists are hitting infrastructure. Recently, they've hit television networks, police departments, ferries to Martha's Vineyard, hospitals, NBA basketball teams, minor league baseball teams. Ransomware groups have been coming for businesses, municipalities, and towns for a long time, but now they're hitting infrastructure that affects the lives of all Americans. It's getting bad enough that the Justice Department, in particular the FBI's Director Christopher Wray, stated that dealing with ransomware is on par with dealing with terrorists after 9/11. Suddenly there's a scramble to deal with something that has been a constant problem for the last couple of years. And it turns out this is a billion-dollar industry that many didn't know existed. Today we're going to explore a bit of the history behind cyber threats, how they're evolving, and what you can do to secure your business. It's a story we're going to let a panel of experts share. Today we'll meet three cybersecurity experts from Edafio Technology Partners. All three spend every day staying up to date on emerging threats while also helping companies move from a reactive to a proactive cybersecurity stance. Valerie Mooring is the team leader for Edafio's cybersecurity and healthcare consulting practices.
Everyone really does describe or define cybersecurity differently. Probably for me, I would say that cybersecurity is really, it's not just for businesses, it's in your personal life as well, but it's really trying to do everything that you can to reduce your information getting stolen, your businesses being shut down, your personal information being compromised.
Jeremy Osborne is a cybersecurity expert providing Chief Information Security Officer services for multiple Edafio clients. If you had to characterize the typical company you talk to these days and their mindset, their corporate mindset toward cybersecurity, how would you describe that, just for an average company that you speak with?
I'd say probably most of the folks that I talk to are really concerned about cybersecurity, but they don't have a really good appreciation for how their organization or their business or their product, how that translates into value for a malicious mindset, a malicious attacker, right? A really common kind of statement that I hear quite often is, we don't have anything the bad guys would want. Well, the bad guys don't know what they want until they get into your system. So it's kind of I'm not exactly sure how I'd want to describe it, but I would say that the corporate mindset is one of a lack of framework to understand the value of their business or their resources to a malicious mind.
Sam Grubb is a senior cybersecurity consultant for Edafio with a specialized focus on NIST-based compliance. He is also the author of the book, How Cybersecurity Really Works.
I typically run into a curiosity, I would say, these days. I think in the past it's been maybe apprehension or apathy about we don't really care about cybersecurity, or it's not really a part of our core business. And with recent attacks and things that have happened, the media and sort of heightened awareness around how cybersecurity can affect businesses, there's a lot of curiosity of well, what can we do better? How can we do this? How is this sort of program or tools going to help us? But also thinking that this is a sort of separate issue. This is something that they're doing one time, or talking about doing an audit, or something that is not a part of their core everyday functions, which is really simply not true.
What really drove the frenzy that is going on right now? How did we step into the risk that exists today?
Well, technology became available to the public at kind of a commodity level. It became very affordable, and it became part of the public's life without the corresponding education to really understand what the implications of that growth is.
One of the things that we in cybersecurity have sort of had a legacy of is this idea of the perimeter, the barrier, with a GUI center, right? And so we think of something like an internal and an external network. So you have your internet, and then you have your corporate network, your home network, right? These things that are considered private. And that legacy has really haunted us, because what we focused on in cybersecurity are these perimeter controls. So we focused on things like firewalls and intrusion detection systems and proxies and these sorts of things that really only protect data or connections when they're going in or out of your network. So when you're connecting stuff out to the internet, like going to a website or that sort of thing, you have these protection tools. But once somebody's inside the network, there's not really any controls in place at all. And because attackers are using the traffic that everybody uses, they're not using these weird things they used to, like viruses and they still use malware, but it's using PowerShell. It's using tools that are already in place. They're exploiting tools that are already put into place. The number of times I've seen Screen Connect, which is used by IT departments the world over to do remote administration, used by attackers, is astounding. They'll just go in, they'll go onto the page, a normal page, and download the demo version of Screen Connect and use that to get back into the device in order to continue exploiting it. So we have to start thinking, and really what we've seen with these attacks over and over again is a change of mindset from, okay, we're building the Great Wall of China to keep the Huns out, and more looking at sort of guerrilla warfare tactics, right? We have the enemy already has passed the gate. How are we going to find them? How are we going to identify them? How are we going to keep our people safe when, for lack of a better term, the call's coming from inside the house?
The internet originally was intended to be an open place where all information could be shared amongst everyone. And what that's translated into over time is that it's really been a business enabler. It's really kind of empowered society as a whole to share ourselves and to share our businesses and to share opportunities with each other without the corresponding kind of education and translating what we knew to be good security practices into the new world of technology.
It might help to look at just a little bit of the history of how we got here and how some of the threats have evolved. Ransomware events looked very different 10 years ago. Typically, they would hit individual computers starting in Europe with a message from Interpol saying that that particular computer had been tracked viewing websites that were illegal. They would ransom that computer, and users were typically asked to submit payment via a money order. Then it came across the Atlantic to the United States, and a form of the same attack would be seen with a message from the FBI. The ransom amount would range in the neighborhood of $100 to $200. But in 2017, something changed. That's the year we started seeing nation states getting involved and attempting to bring entire companies and industries to their knees. In that same year, we saw a group come out of nowhere, showing up on Twitter and in other places called the Shadow Brokers. They claimed to have hacked the NSA and released computer code that supposedly was used to break into foreign government systems. And over a period of several months between 2016 and 2017, they started dribbling out some of the NSA's best kept hacking tools. Tools used to do things like break into a firewall for an entire computer network, and to do so undetected. In 2017, we saw North Korea use one of the NSA's own tools to initiate the global ransomware attack called WannaCry. It hit 150 countries. And the lasting legacy of WannaCry was that it didn't just hit individual users, it hit businesses, and it hit hospitals. It hit the British health system hard, and that's when we first saw images of ambulances being turned away from hospitals in the UK. It was the first time you could visually see ransomware wasn't just something that would hold up an individual's computer. It could cripple healthcare, making the cost of the ransomware attack not only measurable in dollars, but also in lives. And it got worse. 1 month after the attack, Russia picked up the same NSA tools and used them in their own attack, this time at the Ukraine. It hit every major agency in the Ukraine, every business that operated in the Ukraine, things like post offices, ATMs, which meant people couldn't get to their money. It hit any business within the Ukraine and then started to infect systems of global companies operating in that country. For example, it hit FedEx in Ukraine, and eventually it cost FedEx over $400 million in damages. It also hit the pharmaceutical company Merck, which eventually caused them to have to tap into the CDC's emergency supply of Gardasil vaccine that year, all because of a ransomware attack. That attack also impacted the Cadbury egg factory in Tanzania. And all told, that one ransomware event cost over $10 billion in damages. It was the most destructive cyber attack that we've seen to date. The legacy from that attack is that it opened up cyber criminals' eyes to just how vulnerable the U.S. business infrastructure really is, especially some of our critical businesses. Yet for some reason, many businesses still operate with the mindset that these attacks will have no effect on them. Cyber criminals love every business that attempts to save money by not investing in cybersecurity policy or protection. So what is it about American businesses that makes them more vulnerable to an attacker? Simply put, it's our incentive model for modern business. Think about how Silicon Valley works. Many tech companies operate under the mantra of move fast and break things. The market rewards getting something to market before the competition, so companies race to release with the idea that they will fix the bugs later. The problem is, later never comes, or businesses don't update their systems, creating risk, and, as cybersecurity experts describe it, increase their threat surface. Here's an example. We've all bought into the idea of a frictionless society. We bake in little software tools to our business that create efficiency, but we rarely update them or secure them. We never realized that we were slowly, over time, creating the world's most ripe attack surface. Ransomware groups realize they can hold entire businesses hostage and charge them millions of dollars to get their data back. And those businesses are oftentimes willing to pay the ransom to get that data back. But that doesn't eliminate the problem. Another angle of this issue is the ransom threat with an extortion chaser, which is, in effect, ransoming your business system and data with the threat that if you do not pay, the cyber criminal will begin to release your data online.
I think a lot of folks get a false sense of security through the technologies that they have in place. Their IT folks have put antivirus in place, so of course they're protected. They have firewalls in place. That should solve my security. The managed services company that I work with, they're taking care of my security, and they're not really thinking all the way through what cybersecurity is and all of the other elements that are necessary, the education pieces, the risk management focus. So I think a lot of organizations get this false sense of security because of the technology that they have in place.
What are some of the common things that they ask or that they throw out there that give them a bit of a false sense of security?
Yeah, things like, they have a next generation firewall is a real big one. And then, you start digging into it and they actually don't have the licensing to use the next generation features. They were just sold the box without any features turned on. Or something where they say, oh, well, we have a really good password policy. And they do, it's 12 characters, they change it every 30 days, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't have any user training so that employees are using their password all over the place. They're using the same password over and over again, or they're modifying it ever so slightly every 30 days or 90 days, however often they change it. And they're not using things like multi-factor, so really those passwords are not really nearly as robust as they used to be. So we hear these really old controls that maybe in the early 2000s and late 90s were good, but for modern attacks are just not adequate.
How do you quantify the potential risks?
So one of the ways to quantify the potential risk to organizations is to just think about, in your revenue per day. What is this going to cost my business, my organization, if I'm not able to operate for a day or maybe a week, if you don't have availability to your backups to be able to restore your data and get your employees and your associates back online. If you're not able to communicate and run your business efficiently and effectively because you can't get to your systems, you can't communicate with your vendors. It's this cycle of just thinking about what is, what is my revenue per day and what is my revenue per week, and can I afford to not service my customers for that amount of time. The other really large impact is what does that say to the community that I'm serving? What does that say to my clients?
Some of the early ways that you can begin to quantify the costs of outages are to think about your business and how you operate. What would it cost me if I was unable to get into my email for an hour or a day or a week, right? If I was unable to communicate with my clients or my customers, what would happen if my website went down, if I have online ordering, is one example that you might think about. What would happen if I were unable to run my warehouse for a day? I mean, the logistics and the delivery impact of that, the impact of your business could be catastrophic, even as little as an hour or two of outage.
I would really start looking at your industry and some of the compliance fines that are coming out within that industry. I think a really great example is looking at something like a OCR who administers HIPAA, and even though your organization may not be dealing with healthcare, it's a real good idea of what it's going to cost you should you have some sort of privacy breach. So you can look at these fines that are being levied for having records breached and see and get an idea of, okay, this is the real cost of what a cybersecurity breach could cost me in terms of how much I might get fined or sued or these sort of legal costs, right? And it's a real quantifiable measure. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And it doesn't really matter what sort of size of company you are. You could be facing that amount of payment just to fix it. I'd also start honestly looking at incident response and seeing how much it costs just to have an incident responder come in. Here at Edafio, we like to call that the $10,000 phone call, because if you have to have an incident response team, at minimum, it's going to probably be $10,000. And that's, may not even cover the entire cost of the investigation, depending on how bad it is. So you really have to, if you're looking at these hard numbers of, okay, if this happens and I have to bring these people in, how much are they going to cost? You can get numbers and estimates on that fairly easy, and see, okay, this is going to cost me quite a bit of money.
Think for a minute about business executives, what they have to deal with day in and day out, the pressures of being able to deliver not just on efficiency, but also on a revenue basis. For someone like that, who is probably fighting being overwhelmed on a daily basis, what types of cyber threats are really important for that type of executive to understand? Not have to describe in detail, but just to understand, this is the type of threat, this is what it could do to me. What are the top 2 or 3 that you'd mentioned that they really need to invest time in just understanding?
I would say malware and ransomware, business email compromises is another really risk that I would suggest that executives understand.
The first thing I would say is it is absolutely imperative that cybersecurity is addressed and sponsored at the executive level, at the highest levels of your organization. It must be important and it must be sponsored. That's the foundation for any successful cybersecurity initiative or program. I'd say that from a threat perspective, things that are important for the executives of the organization to know is just how disruptive a breach or a disruption in service is, right? So if I can't get to my email for a day or a week or however long that might be, what is the impact? What are the ripple effects to my business?
The big thing is understanding where your data is, where your critical assets are, and then working back from there on the risks. And working with your other executive leadership, your CFO, your HR, your team leads, however you structure your management, in order to understand, okay, if this were to happen, right, and we have, let's just say you have a database, right, and the database contains all your customer information, addresses, phone numbers, maybe even things like social security and credit card numbers. Start there and say, okay, what could possibly happen to this database, and what are we doing to mitigate that? What are we doing? What controls do we have in place to stop that? And then from there, okay, well, you say we have this firewall. How do we know that's actually stopping the attack, right? How do we audit that firewall? How do we make sure the rules that are in place are the latest and greatest in dealing with the latest threats? And once you start on that path, it really becomes very simple to start tracking these risks and tracking these things, knowing that you're working against what is most likely to be attacked.
One of the steps you encourage an organization to take first, so that they can be positioned to actually grow and mature from a cybersecurity protection standpoint.
So in order for an organization to really kind of grow and implement, even if they've had some false starts in their cybersecurity program, it's really important to, first of all, to get that executive buy-in, that executive sponsorship of the cybersecurity program. After that, it becomes really important to engage with folks who are willing and able to speak truth to power. You really need professionals or folks who their primary responsibility is to think about and to consider cybersecurity inside the organization, and to really promote it and to champion those topics.
I would say some low cost, typically easy to implement solutions would be something like a security awareness program, something that's educating your users, and really, again, just instilling this culture of everyone's on the security team, everyone is learning, a see something, say something mentality, following different podcasts that are security minded and security related, really great listservs are a couple of different examples, thinking about multi-factor authentication and adding that layer of additional access management into your systems are things that are low cost, typically pretty easy to implement and roll out across organizations, although sometimes your users may be annoyed and irritated that they have an additional layer to get into your systems. It is something that if you look at banks and a lot of other types of organizations, it's a must. It's a must-have.
I think a mature organization is an organization that has dedicated personnel at some level to cybersecurity and is organizing at the executive level on a, I would say, monthly, if not quarterly basis, looking at cybersecurity risks and looking at how they are managing their cybersecurity risk. And when I talk about dedicated personnel, what I mean is you have somebody like a chief information security officer, head of security, head of information security, or if you're an organization that can afford in-house security people, you have security analysts on your team. You're investing in security training for your system administrators or your IT people so that they are able to do some of those roles. Or you're seeking outside professional help. You're looking at consulting firms who provide risk consulting or security consulting. So organizations that are spending money on a tool or spending money just on a service without having that dedicated person to make sure that they're meeting their risks, that they're auditing the controls, that the tool or service is working the way it should be. Those organizations, yeah, they're investing in cybersecurity, but they're not maturing their cybersecurity.
I think the average technology consumer, when they walk into the workplace, bring with them their bad habits as well as some of their good habits. And I think it's incumbent on the organization to really embrace and foster a culture of cybersecurity awareness and of education inside the organization. Technology permeates so much of what we do on a daily basis and so much of what our businesses, it drives the business in a lot of cases. And so I think that the risk to an organization has to be addressed about what are my associates, what is my workforce bringing into the business? Because they are bringing both good and bad ideas in.
What are some of the things that you see that are pretty common today that organizations do that are just some of those things you think you need to stop this like right now?
Yeah. I think the big thing is assuming somebody else is doing your security. That's the biggest thing. So many organizations assume that I have a cloud provider, for example. I have 365, so I'm secure. I have an MSP I work with, so I'm secure. I have in-house IT and they're handling my security. They're doing what they're supposed to. Assuming that things are getting done instead of checking and auditing to make sure things are done. That's something that's really painful in organizations, because when a incident does happen and people don't know how to respond to it, controls aren't in place, it becomes much worse. It is only the organization to blame. There's nobody else that they can push the buck off to, because it was ultimately their responsibility to make sure they were secure. I think another big thing is buying a tool and not investing in the personnel, like I said earlier. Getting a tool like a monitoring tool or buying a third-party monitoring service, getting somebody who comes in and does a security operations center for you, but then not truly working and integrating and using those controls or listening to what they're telling you to improve security, and just sort of letting it go and not customizing it to how your business operates. Ultimately, it just becomes a waste of money, because you can't secure an organization by just putting on a tool, turning it on and saying, okay, we're good to go. You're going to have gaps. You're going to have places where attackers can get in, and it's ultimately going to fail because you're not investing the time and resources in terms of personnel that you need to manage that tool.
We see a lot of organizations that once they get past the the analysis paralysis of not knowing where to begin, what they begin to realize is that education itself and transparency in conversations is super important, right? It's really important to have a group of folks who regularly meet and talk about risks to the business. And those folks in that working group, it's really important to pull from all areas of the business, not just executive leadership, not just your IT folks. You want to bring in everyone. You want to bring in your operations folks, your finance folks. Everyone has a unique and really powerful story to tell and ideas to bring to those conversations, because cybersecurity is everyone's job. Cybersecurity is absolutely essential to the success and longevity of a business.
The attack's going to happen. What you have to prevent is the attacker from being successful in their objectives. And that really requires more of a detection and really just assuming you're already breached, assuming nobody is trustworthy. It doesn't matter who they are, how long they've worked for you. It doesn't matter. Their account is untrustworthy until proven otherwise. And focusing on that sort of architecture. And also really focusing that cybersecurity is a separate practice. Originally, what we saw in early time was the security person was the IT administrator, the system administrator, whoever was running your servers or running your systems. They were also your security person, and it's really just been the last 10 years or so in which we've really separated that person out and said, no, we need a separate expert who can do cybersecurity, because we can't have somebody who is in charge of the everyday running also focusing on security. It's too much. We have to have a specialized person who has that specialized training to do this security work.
I think maybe one call to action that I would have, and it's a little bit fun, and that's I would ask every executive across the entire globe to send out an email to their organization, just reminding everybody that works for them that they will never ask for you to buy a gift card for them.
So the FBI advises those impacted by ransomware to not pay the ransom, although it is not illegal to do so yet. Legislation is currently being proposed that would make paying a ransom to cyber criminals illegal if you are a business operating in the United States. So what's the right answer? Many businesses believe that the cost of the ransom is still cheaper than rebuilding their systems and data from scratch. Take, for example, a ransomware attack in Baltimore a couple of years ago. The hackers were demanding about $75,000 in Bitcoin to give the city's data back. Baltimore refused to pay. And ultimately, the cost to rebuild all those services that were destroyed or held hostage was $18 million. Of course, even if they paid, there would have been additional costs to make sure that the ransomware was completely removed from the data, a process which carries no guarantees. Over and over again, you see businesses and their insurance companies decide to pay the ransom because the ransom is so much cheaper than rebuilding. Looking back on the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, though, well, that's reinforced a lot of lessons. It was seen as this massive attack on our country, when in fact, it all came down to an employee. An employee who had an old inactive account, whose password had been stolen, and they'd not turned on multi-factor authentication, one of the most cost-effective deterrents available to secure your systems. As long as businesses keep making it that easy, the ransomware and cyber attacks will continue. And it doesn't matter what we do at a federal or state level, when it's so easy to hack an American company using a stolen password, well, these attacks aren't going away anytime soon. So what's right for your business? After spending time with our panel, it's apparent that an investment in cybersecurity preparedness can be exponentially cheaper than having to weather a cybersecurity attack, even if that preparedness seems like it can be expensive at the time. And with cybersecurity insurance companies either cutting coverage or refusing to provide coverage while increasing their premiums this year typically by 2 times, a plan for securing your business has never been a more critical issue to consider. We want to thank you for joining our panel today. For more information, please look for details on this session in your Northwest Arkansas Tech Summit information. On behalf of our panel, thank you for participating.